lights.
There we go. Now we're cooking with gas.
go.
All right.
All right.
All right, everybody. Welcome to From Concept to Cosplay. I am your moderator for the morning. I'm Liz Lamb-Ferro, manager of global brand marketing at Wizards of the Coast for Magic. I am not a cosplayer, but I have been inspired to become one now because of the fantastic creations that I've seen this weekend and from some of our panelists. One of which is the infamous Mel Lee. Mel's a member of our Magic Creative R&D and is also a cosplay hobbyist. Mark Winters, art director of Magic the Gathering. Creator of many of your favorite characters. Christine Sprankle, professional cosplayer. And if you've seen any of our Origins 5 walking around from Team Cosplay, just know that that is Christine's doing. So if you want to see her work in action, that's pretty impressive. So, yeah. And last but certainly not least, Jeremy Jarvis, senior art director for Magic the Gathering. Woo! No need to enhance his introduction any more than it is. So I want to start with a topic that I find pretty interesting of how do you create a character that is iconic, that has a look, that has a thing where you're like, oh, I know that that's Jace, or I know that that's, you know, someone from X-Men or someone from this IP. How do you figure out what that thing is that's going to get them started? So I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy Jarvis to walk us through that.
Great. So in talking about, sure.
We'll pass down the clicker.
In talking about character design, kind of in broad strokes in the abstract, one of the things we really like to do is to make sure that the character is not context dependent. And what I mean by that is make sure you don't have to show them doing the thing to know who they are. You want to try to take their job or their themes or their purpose and build it into them visually. So I want to talk about a pretty extreme case of this. Ashiok. Funny story about Ashiok. Ashiok was in the file as Dark Jace, right? Because of all the nightmare stuff and Theros and dreaming things, it was like Dark Jace, like Jace with a goatee. And so we were like, oh, that sounds good. And so we kind of take the file and sidle out the door, and then we're like, okay, so we're not doing that, so what are we really going to do here? And so, you know, Ashiok could have well been, with as open as that character was, cares about nightmares, that's kind of all we knew. Could have just been a pile of gore, right? Of just viscera, of just this nasty thing. Nightmare, got it, great. That's not what we wanted to do. We wanted to really play to that idea of even nightmares, that kind of ephemeral abstraction you get of something that's really engaging but also off-putting. It's kind of the memory of a feeling, of a dream, can we put Ashiok back up? Thanks. Of something that's really beautiful and really engaging, but also to whatever extent unknowable. You don't have to see from Ashiok's POV to understand the power suite. You don't have to cut to the other character's POV to see them being tormented. It's all right there, built into Ashiok's being. I know it's also funny to start with this one. That's as close to an unplayable, uncosplayable character. It's like, well, first, saw the top of your head off, and then you're going to want to make that smoke, right? So, can we do it with a hat? No, you can never wear a hat. So, and then a much simpler example would be Liliana, of just building the contract into her skin. There's not some metaphysical thing that has to open above her head for you to see it happen. It's all right there on her as a constant reminder of where the character's been, where she's coming from, and the thing she's trying to solve for. She's trying to solve for her own skin, the necromancer that is afraid of death. Sarkhan. Let's talk about KTK Sarkhan. We literally took Sarkhan the Mad, that's what he's wearing under this, put some Mardu stuff on it. Sarkhan's from here. We know he's Mardu. Kept the black fingernails. That was super important to me because he's still kind of crazy, right? And then the thing that I really like is we played into the idea of the Mardu having those dragon bones on their shoulder to kind of drape banners off of. They're the clan of the wing. It got us a bunch of wingy quotes. But to really capitalize on that and as a way to remind viewers that like he is still under the thrall of Nico Bolas. Well, the horns are shaped like that on purpose, and his head is the bauble between the horns, right? And then actually it was Winters in working on the character progression within that block of when we see him finally in DTK, of trying to get to a different state of Sarkhan that, again, just by looking at him, conveys some of the themes of, I think the 3 targets were literally take the weight off of his shoulders, find some way to convey the idea that no longer is he as under Bolas's thrall, but he is closer to being a little bit of his own dragon. And the other one was some sort of little love letter from Ugin, a reminder of that instance in FRF. You want to talk some about that?
Yeah, so JJ challenged me to reimagine Sarkhan in Dragons, and he mentioned, like, I want the sensation that the world has been lifted off of his shoulders, like, and so I just did that. I just took everything off of his shoulders.
Literally take the crap off of his shoulders.
Yeah. And JJ was like, love it! But also, a couple of things that I wanted to try to capture is, you know, Sarkhan ends in this kind of happy place. He's among his dragons. Like, it's a great ending for Sarkhan. And so I wanted to kind of convey that in the way the character presents itself. Like, instead of like the flaming eyes, which we normally see, we see the dragon eyes, which are still kind of glowing and very Sarkhan-like. But also, if you notice, you know, this plate, he's got his shoulders back. He's proud of where he is and what he's become. And so those are the areas that I was really enamored by and tried to capture.
You want to talk some about his nipples?
I like his nipples. In that
you took them off, didn't you?
Yeah, I did.
So
it was a challenge.
The reason we had to accelerate this character design, and Mark stepped up to bat internally to take care of this on the clock, was that they needed to sculpt him for the video. And so for some reason it became very important to Mark that, you know, part of the draconic nature is he wouldn't have nipples anymore. And it kind of plays into like he's now an orphan of time. He was never born in this timeline. And so that's an anatomical thing that, yeah, maybe you wouldn't have. Then the model comes back in and
it's got nipples.
Yeah, and Winters just loses his mind for like 4.5 minutes. He's like, they put nipples on him. Specifically called out no nipples. So guys, if you're gonna cosplay Sarkhan, you're going to have to solve the nip issue.
I probably spent 3 hours designing the scale pattern on his chest to terminate where the nipples would be, very specifically to solve for that.
So that's character design.
You're welcome.
And here is the painting that resulted from that. So that is the work and thought that goes into it. A liberated Sarkhan with no crap on his shoulders, no nipples, and dragon eyes. You're welcome, world.
Does Sarkhan have a belly button?
Probably not.
Okay.
Probably not.
I'm just thinking the whole not born thing. You don't have a belly button, no nipples. All right.
Right.
Well, that's why I put fabric right across.
Oh, okay. So we're not quite. Okay.
Yeah.
Now I know. I've always wondered.
Creative.
I know. That'll be in Rich Hagen's Magic Trivia Contest. The show after this. Does Sarkhan have nipples? And now you know. So shifting into literal cosplay translations, you see a card, you think it's awesome, you're like, I want to wear that. I want to do that. That's a bit of a challenge because it's not always a Planeswalker character. It's not always that central IP figure. It can be other things. So shifting into what I find to be one of the most beautiful art pieces that we've done.
Oh, thank you.
Mark Winters, can you talk a little bit about Amara?
Yeah, so Jeremy commissioned this to me, and it was pretty open. It was an elven healer standing in her, you know, kind of zen-like garden at the time. There wasn't a lot of really specific things that I needed to hit other than Selesnya. It's part of Dragon's Maze, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And so at first I was thinking I need to have someone who can run a maze, but then at the same time I had an elemental token card going along with it, and at the time she was actually going to be featured on it. And I was like, well, she could just be in a beautiful dress, riding on her elemental, and she doesn't need to, you know, be wearing pants or anything. So I gave her this beautiful, elegant gown, and I tried to tie as much of the Selesnyan iconography, like straight into her, like Jeremy was saying, like let them wear the job, and then you don't have to show them doing the job. And so that's where my head was at the time. And of course, Amara changed a little bit, and some things moved around or whatever, but I'm still really happy with where it ended up. If you want to flip to the next one. And so after this card came out, I get an email from this random person I'd never heard of on DeviantArt. It's like this beautiful cosplay. And I was like, oh my God, I wish you were around so I could have just photographed you for reference. And then got into this weird time loop paradox thing.
I
and
don't want you to make me cry right now.
Well, speaking of the person that you would wish were around to be able to just use to build the thing. So Christine Sprankle is known for doing some pretty incredible cosplay pieces. This is a photo of her from the Modern Masters weekend in Vegas, where you were Avacyn, and this was in Rolling Stone magazine.
And it was super hot. I'm dripping sweat. Like,
You look good.
side note, it's so nasty.
So, Christine, I'm going to click through a couple of your photos of how you constructed it, but I'm curious to know, as a cosplayer, how do you choose a character, and how do you decide what is the most important thing from that visual representation by the owners of the IP to take with you as you start creating your next piece?
Well, where to start? So when I got Amara, I got it a few months ahead of time so I could just kind of pop up at a pre-release and just be like, have you joined the Conclave today? So it was my first adventure into a brand new thermoplastic that just came out called Vorbla. And
Is that what this is up on?
yeah, the whole chest piece was made out, because when I saw the art, I understood that she was supposed to be some sort of elven healer. She calls her elementals and they do the fighting, but I really like armor, and I like seeing priest and a little bit of something that, just in case something gets around, they're a little bit protected. So I went with an armored look for the chest piece instead of just a pretty corset. And I honestly had no idea what I was doing. It was the first time I ever got the thermoplastic, and it was supposed to be a corset, so I literally got a corset pattern and translated it onto the Warbla and went from there. Big mistake. It worked. It worked at the time, and nobody knew that it, was kind of had a hiccup, but whatever.
Look good.
Yeah, Selesnya, it's there. So it was just a lot of trial and error of just trying to figure out how pieces attached where, and when I actually moved, I didn't just kind of stand there and look awkward and so it took a while, but it was, and then the dress piece, because it was supposed to be elven, I literally went and got a simplicity pattern that was Arwen from Lord of the Rings. I went as elven as I possibly could. And I don't usually line my cosplays. I don't finish them 100% on the inside because it's hot. It's super hot. And I don't need any extra layers whatsoever. And I don't care what people see on the inside because they never see it anyways. So I kept it unlined. And that was a great picture because my neighbors were right across the street, and they were just like, I'm just like, yes.
Well, you have the contacts in.
Yeah, I have the contacts in. It was like the first run, so I can't really see, so I'm just kind of waving, and I have this creepy blank stare, and they just kind of went back inside. But
nice. So then there's the finished product, and can you talk a little bit about having to figure out how you're going to actually move in the cosplay? Because it's one thing to see something on a card and be like, oh, that's a beautiful piece, but how do you actually decide, okay, I'm going to have to eliminate this so I can, sit down occasionally?
Yeah, this one was great because I didn't have to edit it as much. It was actually a really easy piece of just elf. Majestic. A couple of my other cosplays, and a couple of like the planeswalkers that I've done, they're not, like, I straight up asked a couple of the artists, like, what were you thinking? And they were just like, well, I never expected somebody to actually wear it. And I was like, okay, well, future reference, just saying.
Great.
And so it's just kind of like, especially in cosplay, I really think you should always just bring a little bit of yourself into it and do what makes you happy, and it'll come out better. And when you wear it, you'll feel better and you'll look really cool and just like elf, you know. So it doesn't need to be 100% accurate. It's a fantasy game, and fantasy doesn't work in real life. It doesn't translate into 3D. So do what makes you feel happy, and you'll be happier with the overall look. And there's always other cards too. Like, you will see other translations. Like, when people ask me, so what Liliana did you do? And I'm like, well, like, what artist did you choose from? And it's like, well, I chose the breastplate from Alexi. The hip piece is from Therese, and it's just pick and choose to where it works all into one. And if anybody really says, well, you know, Elspeth doesn't have wings because she's from Theros, and it's just like, it's my cosplay.
She doesn't though.
She died. It was just, I was sad. It was me grieving, okay? It was my representation of go, my angel, ascend to the lofty underworld heavens.
I buy it.
And
Do you guys ever do any like kind of method, like not just what the artist was coming from, but like the character's path, like, you know, in preparing for Liliana, did you try to kill your brother?
well, I don't have a brother, so
I wonder why.
you never know. You never know. Though I do spend a copious amount of hours in front of the mirror trying to figure out what is the best, creepiest smile. Or the best elven smile, because you can't just, like, for every, you know, like, picture, just, or be a stately knight and just kind of.
We've actually talked about the two expressions that are acceptable for a planeswalker to have.
You want to quiz me on them?
Yes, what are they, Mark?
Okay, snarling or smirking.
Yes.
That's it.
That is the range of emotion allowed.
How's your snarl, Christine?
There you go.
Perfect. All right, we'll get a smirk in later, I'm sure.
This is why I wear a mask for this cosplay.
What was that?
This is why I wear a mask for this cosplay.
Yes.
It does all the smirking for me. It's fantastic.
That is a great transition. So a lot of you are probably wondering what this Eldrazi spawn is doing on the table, just chilling in front of Jeremy. Are you frightened at all yet, Jeremy?
I can.
Okay, maybe not. So I'm going to turn this over to Melly to talk a little bit about those not so literal translations when we have,
Yes.
you know, like interpretive bits where it's like, oh, I like this concept. How do I do something different with it that's not maybe exactly what you'd see on a card?
Eldrazi are the perfect example for this. So they're either 30 feet tall or they are like small dog sized, and I'm neither of those things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about not so literal cosplay translations. There we go. Okay, so you know who your favorite character is, but there's a lot of constraints that go along with it. There's this terrible thing called real-world physics that really wrecks a lot of your cosplay plans. And say, you know, you can only manage so much time or budget or the size of the cosplay itself before it kind of collapses in on itself. And you really want to, as Christine was just saying, you want to give it your own spin, and you want to make it yours. And all the time through this, you still want to remain true to the character. So in my mind, when I'm thinking about a cosplay, I have like these two main goals when I'm not able to make it a literal translation. I want to communicate to other people seeing it what or who you're trying to look like. So you want to match the structure, you want to match visual themes, and you also want to try to match the personality and maybe some of the story relevance of the character. And at the same time, you can think about ways that you can innovate on that character. So how can you customize it for you? How can you put yourself as that character and what they might become? And most importantly, I think, what's the most fun for you to make or show about this character? So I'll start off with the Sarkin character. So last year before cons, I was told that we were about to go to Sarkin Val's homeworld. So I knew that he was going to be in the set, and I was most familiar with this image of Sarkin Val, which I believe is from the Alara block. And so I remember reading his web description, and this was the moment where I think I fell in love with him. So, with the incantation of the spell, a huge dragon made of fire streaked out of Sarkin's body and invaded the battle, blasting the battlefield. Fascinated, Sarkin watched as his men and those of his enemy were burnt to cinders. It was a display of ultimate rage and power that surpassed anything he had ever seen. It stoked a passion in him that had never before flared to life, and along with it, his planeswalker spark. So, along with that passage, I saw a picture of a big flaming dragon hand, and I think between the two of those, I was pretty sold at that point. The dragon hand was definitely on my mind as one of the things that I was personally the most excited about cosplaying. And I love sort of the wildness of his character design. And as Mark was saying in his updated design, he has a lot of these cool extra elements like the dragon bones that are on him that I really wanted to bring to life. So here's the construction of the Banefire piece, which is the name of the card where Sarkin has his dragon hand in. My process was that I first found a basic 3D model of Dragon Head. And so the fantastic thing about this internet age that we live in is that if you know generally what you want to look for, you can find a nice base and then adjust it. So what I did is I just went online, found a pretty generic 3D model for a Dragon Head, and then adjusted it in a 3D design program so that it was the right sort of shape and about the right scale for what I needed. So then I had this nice base, and I made that using papercraft. So it's just cardstock that's covered in a hard resin to give it some structure. I also put like a metal brace in there to support the weight, because it ended up being a pretty weighty prop. And then all of the extra stuff on top of it was just sculpted in foam. And foam, as a cosplayer, is just your best friend ever. It's super light, it takes shapes really well, and oh my gosh, if things don't have to move, if it gets to stay solid, then it's fantastic. And my favorite thing with any kind of costume, as you can see right now, is just lights. I'm a sucker for lights. Let's see. So some more progress shots of the armor. Here's the base, and as Christine was saying, thermoplastics are fantastic. They're really easy to use. There's a ton of great tutorials out there, so if you're just getting started, you can basically just search Warbla on the internet and find yourself some awesome YouTube videos, settle in for the night, and learn a little bit about what you need to do. So those are the pauldrons on the top, and then on the bottom, one of the things that I thought was really cool about the Sarkin character in the new design was what Mark was saying, the little piece of Ugin that he carries around, and it's Sarkin's hedron. So what I did is, since I like to make life easy for myself, I took a screen grab of what the hedron looked like in the beautiful trailer that Mark worked on. And I took the line art from that image and then put that into my 3D modeling program. So what I then was able to end up with was an exact three-dimensional model of what I needed the dimensions to look like. So I didn't have to worry about cutting anything and being imprecise. And it's little things like that that really make your life easier as a cosplayer. And it's also really educational, because like 3D modeling is something that I used to use in my work all the time. Yeah, it's a very educational process going through this. So this is one of the shots of the finished piece. Sorry, let me get my bearings. So one of the reasons that I really love Magic is because it's this unique experience that lets you interact with this world of epic images and stories, while at the same time getting to know these wonderful real humans in the real human world, and while you're playing the game itself. So what cosplay really lets me do is to take that a step further. So with the help of these other people that I meet through the game, I get to take these vibrant fantasy elements and pull them even closer to reality. So in my previous job as an engineer, I'd often take inspiration from science fiction and fantasy and work in teams of people with similar passionate interests and try to help me figure out how to make these into workable technologies. And really, a cosplay situation is no different. Like, I get to build these things and then work with really awesome, talented photographers, like Jesse Pizzolo, who took this image from Undiscovered Photography. So let's see. So in real life, you know, it's really tough to find people like you, and I feel really lucky that cosplay has recently become this form of art that people can identify with, and I've gotten to just meet so many people through it, and it's just been a really great experience. I've gotten to learn tons of stuff about how to fix things around my house and how to, you know, how different glues work and how different materials set. It's a fantastic learning experience, and you get to have fun and experience this fantasy world that you want to live in really closely, and it's just fantastic.
So I have a question. So how much is like really executing on the game plan, and how much is kind of just rolling with the punches?
90%.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
So one thing that I will say that cosplay is really helpful for is getting you comfortable with failing, because man, I fail all the time.
And I love it though, because then I know next time. Like that's the experience.
There's that element of my background in my former life. I was a watercolorist, and people would be like, oh, how do you control it? And it's like, well, it's not about that. It's about having the confidence that when it starts to go sideways, I'm going to be able to rein it back in. And so there is that element of like, nah, it's not really, you know, for a majorette, it's not about how well you twirl. It's about how you recover when you drop.
The thing is, like, you see these epic movies. This is the biggest thing I can always stress on cosplay. You see these epic movies, and when they go to the costuming section, there is a huge team. There are 50, 100 people working on this one costume. But cosplayers, we're just one person doing that all, like that 100 crew person set up together. You have to be makeup artist, engineer, everything. So if you don't get it right the first time, that is okay.
And to me, I think that's part of the fun. Like, you get to make your team out of your friends. So say one of your friends is really good at makeup, or one of your friends is really good at making wigs.
Yeah, you don't have to have every single skill. It is okay. And if you stretch yourself too thin, things start getting messy. So, yeah, exactly. It's okay.
It's a lot of rolling with punches, though,
Yes.
and a lot of being comfortable with failing.
Yeah, I have that problem with Photoshop. Sometimes I want something blue, and it has to be green, and so I have to, you know, dial it over.
The struggle,
Yeah.
it's real.
No man has suffered for his art like Mark Winters, taking it into levels. Sometimes moving it between RGB and CMYK.
Oh my God.
I'm just going to cut myself right now, and you guys can just pour the salt in.
Where's the lemons?
All right, so next slide. Can we get the slides back? Cool, okay. Oh, yeah, other shot. Yay. Finished shots.
Say how
So,
badass does Mel look in all of these? Like,
guys,
you have red contacts in this as well.
it's true.
Actually, Winters did that in Photoshop.
The dial.
Slid it over.
It was green for a little while. I got it.
Killing me, Smalls.
Did you contemplate nipples on the breast armor for a bit, or?
I am not even going to touch that one. Reddit, I have thoughts for you. Anyway, but yeah, it's a ton of fun just going out and doing these photo shoots. Making new friends with photographers is one of my favorite things to do at cons. And just wandering around and being like, hey, I'm obviously really into magic. I'm obviously super into this character. Let's go hang out and make some of our own fan art, you know? So with that, I'm going to go on to my next costume, the Eldrazi. So in my previous life, a little bit of backstory, before I came to Wizards a short time ago, I was an engineer, and what I did was basically build robots to test for parasites. So naturally, these are two very strange elements that are very close to my heart, are parasites and robots. So when I was going to this project, I was like, boy, you know what I want to do? Is I really want to build a giant parasite, and I want to build a tiny robot. And that's what I did. These are, these are Eldrazi spawn, and they're these adorable 0-1 sackable versions of Eldrazi that scuttle around so that they can pave the way for the big guys, for Ulamog and Kozilek. So to me, they always felt like tiny, adorable robots who just want to be sacrificed. And the larger Eldrazi from Battle for Zendikar are characterized by these, and especially particularly here is the Brood of Ulamog. They're characterized by these beautiful bony plates on top of these very brightly colored bodies, and they have these vibrant purples and blues and sometimes reds, and they have tentacles, tons of tentacles, and they occasionally have these super creepy warped human features. So like they have a spine that is obviously a spine, but that definitely doesn't look like ours and is like a little bit off-putting that way, and they just have this wonderfully creepy atmosphere. And then one of my favorite story points discusses the parasitic nature of some of the Eldrazi that come up in the visual design of Zendikar's vampires. So in case you guys haven't noticed, all Zendikar vampires have these characteristic hooks on their shoulders. So here is a line from some of the delightful lore about this. The Eldrazi took the plains' proud vampires as a race of servants, adapting their very anatomy for servitude. Hook-like horns grew from the vampire's shoulders as convenient handles for the Eldrazi to dominate their slave race for millennia. So the visual resonance of this story and the depth that it sort of shows about the characters themselves, that just shows this great twisted relationship between the vampires and the Eldrazi, just made me all like, ooh, I really want to do that. So here is one of the new Eldrazi spawn tokens, and he was so adorable that I decided I needed to make a little model of him.
Look how cute he is.
His name's Norbert.
That's a temporary name until we get a solid name. Excuse me.
So he's just gonna tromp across, look around, look at this guy.
I feel like I woke up to that twice this week already.
I'm gonna hope he's not gonna tromp on this wire. Yay!
Oh my gosh, he goes backwards.
Anyway, so he's like a little dog-sized robot, and I find him adorable. And this goes back to like, you know, for as far as innovation, like it's just fun to make new weird things. And God knows I've never seen somebody cosplay their own tiny robot. And so that just seemed like a really fun thing to me. Turn around, show him what you're made of. Anyway, so I thought he was adorable, and I hope you guys do too. So. Anyway, so yeah, so then the rest of the costume that I'm wearing right now is based off of the first time that we have shown the actual parasitic Eldrazi on top of the vampire itself. So I loved the idea of these creepy arms that are coming out and gripping the horns that have grown on the vampire. So that was something that I was trying to hit in the costume that I'm wearing right now. So you have these, the large grippy arms and the vampiric horns, and that part was a lot of fun. And then I have the helmet over on the other side right next to the big dragon head. So I'll go into just a few progress images. So the robot itself was built on as a modulation of an existing walking robot, built the tentacles and stuff on top of them, and then on the bottom you see the glowing soft-bodied Eldrazi parasite portion. So I learned, as Christina was saying, a ton of this whole cosplay process is just, I'm going to try a bunch of stuff and throw it at a wall and see what happens, and then I'm going to account for the failures, and man, whatever happens just happens. It's insane. So this was the first time I've worked with sort of like softer, so the tentacles are like kind of squishy, and man, they were a giant headache to go through, and I've decided after going through about 40 tentacles, like I'm done with this, no more tentacles ever. That's one of my major conclusions, but
That's what she said.
certainly went through a lot of revisions. The tentacles are made out of 18-gauge steel wire on the inside so that I could sort of bend them to the right shape. And then to keep them soft on the outside, it's a mixture of foam and some other soft plastics, and then it's all covered in latex. And the whole idea with the latex was to try to give it that nice, smooth, characteristic tentacle look, but man, latex is really hard to work with, so. Another one of those, like, you just got to be cool with failing, and you know, you just kind of go with what you've got. So
it looks more alive this way.
For you saying, I know you're critiquing it, but it looks pretty darn amazing.
You guys are real sweet to me. Thank you. So yeah, here's some more progress shots. It's me with the giant parasite on the back. In the final version, there's a lot more tentacles on it. But this was just sort of like, oh, I'm going to walk down the street with just a big parasite. And then the head of Dominator Drone clearly has no eyes. And I'm like, man, I've got eyes. That's going to be really rough to... So I was spell slinging in this thing the other day, and I was actually able to see other people's cards. I made sure to check with what the deck was before I went in there so I wouldn't have to actually read the text. And as I started the match, I was like yelling at the guy across from me. I was like, hey, so how was your con? And he just like blinks at me and he clearly can't hear me, like muffled through this mask. And he's like, thanks. And I was like, oh no, this is not gonna go well. So yeah, so that one on the right is the finished Dominator Drone head. You can see tons of delicious tentacles. And then on the left is the dragon head from Sarkin. So we'll just go and say that, so cosplay is a ton of fun to do. The best thing about it is you just go out there, you make new friends, you get attacked by these friends in these brutal fight scenes. And boy, like, you know, now that I get to be actually at Wizards and see all the love that goes into these characters and their backstories, you know, there are these amazing pieces that we have for you that are game pieces and story pieces. And man, it's just so incredible and fun to take the depth of these pieces and to kind of like get into them and make your own story out of them, and to get to meet, you know, fantastic friends while you're going through that process. And you know, I'm so happy to be up here doing what I do and getting to talk to you guys about it. So thanks for being here, and yeah.
So with that, I'm gonna have a big round of applause for these guys. They've just, I'm so in awe of the talent at this table, knowing that I have no creative bones in my body, and these guys have more than enough for the rest of us. Let's do some questions. We have some time for that. So if you can head over to the microphone to your right, if you do have questions, we can ask away from these guys. Great.
I'll get there, so let me know.
Well, I will prompt them with questions because I have a ton, and I have a microphone, so I can do that. So one of the things that we've talked about a little bit is, you know, particularly with characters like Amara, where they're not necessarily this main central IP focus. You're going, how do I give her a personality and make it clear that she's part of Selesnya? But my question is, like, Ravnica's all about, like, I'm going to label this is my guild, that's my guild. It can get a little NASCAR-y with all of the labels. So how did you give Amara some personality and some distinctiveness without her being this central figure in that IP?
Well, sure. The first thing I do is I tend to look at the silhouette of the various characters, and then I start trying to find a space in between those main characters, something a little unique, something that is ownable for that character. And so, like, if you squint down and look at Amara, she has a very distinct silhouette that's all her own. And then I work backwards into going, okay, well, I've got this thing that I like, and then I try to start building Selesnya into her, using, you know, texture and things like that, as opposed to big badges or emblems or things like that, although she is actually wearing her.
But it's subtle and sophisticated.
Yeah, Selesnya symbol, like right into her. But, you know, for me, it was mostly silhouette and then materials.
Good to know. We do have some questions lining up here. Jace has come to the forefront with a question. So, Jace, go ahead.
Question for Mel. You talked a little bit about the 3D modeling software you used. I've never really used any 3D modeling software myself. What software would you recommend starting with to sort of learn the process?
Sure, yeah. So there's some really great freeware out there. Personally, myself, during my engineering time, I got a lot of experience with SolidWorks, but there's some great free versions of that. AutoCAD has a freeware software, I believe it's called 123D Create, and Google also has Google SketchUp. So it'll allow you to take simple line art that you can draw like in Adobe Illustrator, or, you know, just scan in some line art and then extract the lines from there. And from there you can start building your 3D shapes. And there's a lot of great tutorials that come with those. Luckily, since 3D printing is such a big deal right now, 3D softwares are similarly very competitive, and they're all trying to sort of get a foothold over the consumer audience. So yeah, there's a lot of great options out there. I would start with the AutoCAD one. It's very user-friendly and was sort of made for people who haven't done 3D modeling before.
Thank you.
Sure.
With the explosion of popularity in cosplay, I'm just wondering if we're going to see any more characters that aren't necessarily planeswalkers that cosplayers can attach to and kind of feel connected to, rather than just leaving them and disappearing.
I think that's one of your guys'.
Yeah,
So,
that's
yeah, sure. I mean, we introduce new characters all of the time. Like part of the challenge with Magic as an IP and why you see so many planeswalkers is, well, we have that kind of Star Trek model of moving from place to place. The plane-bound people stay plane-bound, but we certainly have used venues like if you think about character content in Commander, where we find venues to kind of to either check in with known characters or to do a little bit of a rewind and to be like, remember Teferi and Freyalise, or whatever the thing is. So yeah, there's legendary characters in every setting. We just don't get to follow them around as much as we do the planeswalkers. But we also have new planeswalker designs that I wish I could tell you about, but I cannot. But we continue to make things, rest assured.
Yeah, I've honestly never had a problem with that. I always look at what deck's hot right now and pick a card from that. I cosplayed Mercadian.
Siege Rhino.
yes. Rhino cosplay confirmed.
Do it. Dream it.
But or just iconic ones. I did Mercadian Mass Brainstorm, and all she is just the lady, and it was unreal when I walked into GP Vegas the first year that it had it, and it was just is that the lady from Brainstorm?
Yeah.
Is that Brainstorm? So I don't know. Honestly, if you have problems, you don't want to do the planeswalkers, look at something just iconic that was just do Time Walk. Be a Mox Emerald. Or
You could be that stasis dog. It could be you.
Or
an Eben Frieder rabbit.
Can
There you
someone
go.
please do Enthralling Victor? I just want one.
You gotta hit the
Enthralling
gym,
Victor.
man. No offense. It's an 8-pack.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey, so quick question for Christine and Mel. So other than a sewing machine, a hot glue gun, a heat gun, what is your favorite next best tool for aspiring cosplayers?
there's so many.
Yeah,
But if you had to pick
I have
one.
this horrible weakness for buying tools. My apartment is pretty much just I live in a garage. You don't want to go in there right now. So I love my Dremel. It's my favorite thing. It's super versatile. It's definitely worth the investment. If you work a lot with large props, you're going to want to cut a lot of foam. A foam cutter is fantastic. There's a lot of different hot wires or hot knife cutters. That's one of my favorite things to use. It's super easy. It's very clean. I have a super luxury item that I get really excited about. I do a lot of 3D printing, so I picked up a 3D printer, and nowadays the price is dropping a lot, and they're super reliable. So as long as if you can get comfortable with some of the 3D modeling programs, and they are pretty user-friendly, I would highly recommend getting one of those. They're a lot of fun. Or in a lot of cities, they have maker spaces, which are also really great because just like cosplay, it has its own community. So for example, here in Seattle, I live down the street from a place that has a bunch of 3D printers, a bunch of laser cutters, some big milling machines and routers, which you could never buy and put in your own apartment. And it's just a really fun place to just hang out and meet people and talk about your project, and people can teach you about it. So certainly that varies city to city, but if you can find a good one, it's a super fun community to get to be part of.
Some of my favorite things, a Dremel. It's a must-have item, and the different bit heads that you need for it. I also hoard different levels of thicknesses of foam, and it's really bad. I really love that. If you want to get some super sick borders with Warbler, this is a pro tip right here. They have these things called bead, like, shapers. I actually don't, bead trays. And what it is like when you're molding your own beads, they're like these little trays. And it has a perfect V shape, square, and round shape. You heat that Warbler up, you sit there with Play-Doh, and you feed it through. You have to have Vaseline because it will stick to the plastic that the bead tray is made out of. And you will get the most perfectly shaped border you have ever seen. I didn't tell you that.
Okay.
But I love that a lot. And I also hoard random shaped things. If you ever, like I love kitchenware stuff because then I can mold a Warbler over it. And then super pro tip, if you go to Joann's and they have those stupid animal hats that are made out of like felt that are kind of like thick and it has like the elephant or the pig nose on it, if you cut all that stuff off and kind of cut it in half, you have the most perfect shaped pauldrons you have ever seen in your life.
Thank you so much.
I love how Christine's just like, yep, pro tip.
I thought she was going to end that differently, where it's like if you cut all of that stuff off, you have a hat.
And you
That's weird. I appreciate the craft, though.
No, it's amazing though. Like when you're making a cosplay, like how excited you get about just random pieces of what normal people think are garbage that are lying around, and you're like, oh my god, it's the perfect square. You will come with me.
Yeah,
Okay,
that awkward
moment
ass.
of truth for the room. How many of you have dumpster dived? Uh-huh. All right, I just had to know.
I mean, if it's for cosplay or not cosplay, I'd still have my hand raised. That's
I'm just imagining your guys' apartments now with just like piles of random things. Oh, let me take you into the corner where the spatulas are.
Liz, you would not believe my awesome tubing collection. It's super sweet. Just like all kinds of diameters. Great.
Wow. All right.
Great work, and thank you for being here, you guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm really impressed with your hair and the whole thing and the paint.
Thank you.
It looks amazing.
Thank you. My costuming, I'm totally comfortable with bringing more people in. I was Archangel of Tithe over the weekend.
Oh my gosh, you
Hey.
changed over like
Hey,
night.
girl,
Okay.
And so personally, like Mel was talking about bringing in people, I made that in 2 weeks, but I had 4 other people helping me with that. And the engineering, the painting, everything, it was such a fantastic community event. It was fun. But my question is actually for the artists. Now that cosplay is becoming such a huge thing, and I'm sure, I don't know if it actually does even cross your mind whether that's actually the question. With characters coming up now, is it starting to cross your mind? Someone might actually want to cosplay this?
No.
How do I maybe put something in that would be either, I'm going to challenge them even more, or, okay, maybe because I know for Archangel of Tithe, like when I was looking at the picture that Cynthia did, and which is what caught my attention, I was looking, I'm like, okay, if I did that, that'd be like down here, and she's probably like 10 feet tall, and I'm 5'3". So I had to scale, and that was a lot of fun.
proportions.
Yeah, and cutting off like where it's completely straight, and I had to cut so I could actually still move my arm and things like that. But yeah, like is that even in your mind?
So we definitely don't take it as an additional constraint, right? Like designing characters that are going to be resonant, but that people have not seen before, that will also hold up at card size. Like, we live in a world of constraints working on a card game. But it's definitely something that interests us. Like, every time after a convention when there are a few companies that put together kind of music videos for the cosplay, I watch every one of those, kind of trying to look for and anticipate trends, of which I can't really find any. So it's a really hard thing to accommodate for, because so much of what people love about cosplay is the expression of what their personal thing is, and so you would literally be solving on a person-to-person basis. But we do love really trying to represent a variety of silhouettes. And I'm actually interested in the kind of reverse question of how much do you guys consider silhouette critical to cosplay. Like in character design, it's one of the first things. Like if they are just black shapes or all the entire group is backlit, can you tell who all of them are just by their larger shapes? But, you know, once you're moving in real space and in 3D, is that just unimportant? You know, because that is one of the big things we think about, and trying to represent a variety of silhouettes and character shapes and that sort of thing. So does that?
Well, I think probably one of the bigger challenges personally, I mean, I've only just started cosplaying like a year and a half. I cannot speak on a very experienced basis, but trying to find the back,
Sure.
right? Because that's the thing is,
Especially on Magic, it's impossible.
and the silhouette, right? So, I mean, I know Archangel of Tide, there's like no pictures of her. So it was like, how's this gonna work? I added a cape to cover my thing, and I put her manicast on the back of the cape as weights. 3D printed, my friend has one, so we 3D printed the manicast, and I'm like, hidden detail, yay! But yeah, and it's, if anything, it's trying to make sure that from the back, or we're still seeing those really clear shapes. People can kind of go, wait a minute, and that kind of thing. And so I don't know if other cosplayers look at the silhouette, but it's looking at the shapes and trying to make sure that people can recognize, even if it's a personal interpretation of it, taking the interpretation and then saying, well, these are really important aspects, just like what Mel was saying. So
You can buy the Planeswalkers game, Arena of the
that's
Planeswalkers,
true.
and it comes with minis. So that's your reference. for
I
the
did not
backs.
even have to plug that as the brand person up here. I just want to point that
You're
out.
welcome.
Thank you.
All
Mark.
right.
No, I mean, but you know that problem is sometimes a challenge for us art directors too, because sometimes we're showing Liliana from the back for the first time in duels, in the duels interstitials, and you're like, what does she look like from the back? I guess we're gonna find out.
that's awesome. Well, thank you very much between, I mean, the art that you guys, everyone does, that is absolutely amazing. I'm not great with names. Art is what catches my attention. So thank you very, very much. And then cosplayers as well, who bring it to life and inspire the rest of us to be like, yes. So thank you very, very much.
Awesome. I think we have time for one more question, which works out perfectly. So.
Yeah, mine's just quick anyway. It's kind of similar to Courtney's. I was just wondering, like when I was making Avison, obviously I would have loved to have pictures of the back. So is it okay with artists if cosplayers like bug you and are like, do you by any chance have sketches that you kind of did quickly of the back that I could use as a reference, or is that like too like bug you too much? Or I would have loved to ask the artist, but I was kind of like, no, I shouldn't bug them. Like
No, we keep them locked in a room where they're making magic cards. That's all they do.
You can't leave.
That's all they do.
I mean, I can't speak for all artists, but me personally, like when she sent me the photos of Amara, that kind of made my day.
Oh, okay.
And if she would have like reached out and went, how did these shoulders thing work in the back?
Yeah.
I actually did have a sketch of that.
Wow. Well,
Yeah, I got bagged on because like this thing doesn't make sense at all. I was like, no, if you saw it from the back, it actually connects in the back, and it does make sense.
Yeah.
But yeah.
You have a very sad Amara sitting next to you now.
but
Poor
from,
Christine.
from my experience, I have never had a problem with magic artists. I think almost every costume, I've asked them, or I've given them critical feedback.
Yeah.
I think the very first time I ever met Steve Argyle, I just told him, I think Liliana the Veil looks stupid, and he just kind of looked at me. I did. I said it right to his face, because you don't know how hard it was, because that corset does not work in real life. It's no longer a corset. And I just looked at him. I was like, that was real stupid. And he just looked at me, and he goes, it looks pretty, though, right? And I'm like, sure, sure. But every time I've always asked, bugged him. Eric Deschamps. I always get his last name. Deschamps. Because I'm working on Olivia Voldaren, and he completely was like, let me send you some sketches. And I was like, yes. Makes my life easier. So magic artists, my experience, they're always down.
Yeah. Okay.
It might take a while, though, if it's that time of the year where
Yeah.
they're puking and just sending out a million sketches for the next set, but they're always been super accommodating.
Pro tip: don't insult them first.
We're real good friends
Since
now.
your thing's terrible, can I see the back of it?
We're good friends now. It's all blown over.
Awesome. All right. Well, on that note, thank you guys very much. It was a great having you out here, and of course, always let magic be your inspiration for cosplay. So enjoy the rest of PAX.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you guys.